Welcome to Enfield Today. I'm your host, Kevin Kibbe. We have got, oh my goodness, one of the most exciting shows I think we're ever going to do. Enfield has so much history in it that people don't even realize. As you walk around this town, the places you're stepping, if you could go back 100, 200 years, it's incredible the amount of history in this town. And I'm excited to bring my two guests this week, Mr. Tom Arnone from the Enfield Town Council and Mr. Bill Friday from the Enfield Historical Society. And we're going to go over this. It's going to be a two-part show because we don't have enough time to do it in one 30-minute segment. So I got into this a number of years ago, but what really kicked the whole Enfield history in gear for me was when I met with Tom one day, and he did a roving tour of Enfield in an actual bus. And Tom, like, what sparked that for you? What got you interested?
Well, as a town councilman, we're assigned committees as liaisons. So I was assigned Enfield Cultural and Arts. And my colleague Bill Lee and I were discussing, there was a high school tour some years ago where the high school students put this tour together throughout the town, but it is kind of long forgotten. So I volunteered to revive it again, which I had no idea what I was getting into at the time.
Oh, boy.
And as I started researching all the history in Enfield, I was just spellbound by it, excited. And I, look to you now, the Enfield Historical Society, as our preservation of all this. So I hope to add just a little bit to this, the whole story. So,
I mean, what's neat, though, is, like I was saying, you start with a little spark, and then all of a sudden, everywhere you turn, there's more, and there's more, and there's more. Bill, you've been an Enfield resident for a long time, and this guy is an encyclopedia, just letting you know about Enfield history. What made you interested in this? What part sparked it?
Well, my parents came down from Amsterdam, New York. My father was a designer, so, and I was new to Enfield or whatever, but through the years, I've lived there, and we'd go swimming in the Scannick and play Little League ball and the Mount Carmel and Skiddaco, the Rapids, and so it's kind of like, it was fun to think back on those things. All the old Thompsonville, we used to be a soapbox derby there, and used to go down by the Main Street. And,
really?
Yeah.
That's
just,
so cool. I didn't know that.
I can't find any pictures on it, though. But
what sparked your history? You're like, what made you go, this is neat, and I want to learn more?
Yeah. I did a little project, actually, about 8 years on the Scannick River watershed. And what I was doing, I was documenting the old water-powered mills and all the tributaries. There's 174 tributaries that enter the Scannick River before it gets to the Connecticut River. And there was like 146 mills. And so I go out into the woods or whatever, and wherever you see a pond, there's probably a dam, and wherever there was a dam, there was a mill. And then I take the books and research them and find out what kind of mill it was, who ran the mill, when they ran that mill. And it was almost like they were like a grocery store. They changed hands or whatever, and the next guy would add a grist mill or a woolen mill. And so, but there was two kind of parts to it. There was before the Industrial Revolution, where they were just mills, and then after it became factories, woolen factories, powder companies, and that time, that kind of thing.
It's just, I remember too, as a kid, I grew up on Pearl Street Extension down by the Connecticut River, so I played on the tracks a lot, but went down to the river, and there's always like, I remember there were these foundations of things, and I just step over them and play with them. And as I got older, when I went back and I saw the same foundation, suddenly I'm wondering, what was that? Where did people come with their little lunch boxes and walk to these places and go to work every day? And now it's just long gone. It's just like a memory, or not even that to some people. And when I remember talking with Bob Tangway some years ago on the Old Town Hall and the condition it was in the early 70s, and they were about ready to let that sucker go because it was so bad. And, him and a few other folks revitalized it. And that's why it's so important now that we don't let that go.
Right. And that was a reason for the walking tour or driving tour. And speaking of mills, the first mill credited here in Enfield was John Pynchon, which his father founded Springfield, and he put the first wooden sawmill in Thompsonville, right, not a little bit south of where the dam is today.
Okay.
And funny, it actually, the King Philip's War, which was, King Philip was really a Native American, that mill was burned. So even King Philip War was fought here in Enfield, and a very exciting Indian chief also, probably a chief that all Native Americans look back to as being the most powerful, the most, he made the settlers almost turn back and go home. That's what an incredible chief he was, especially in his way of getting all the other tribes in this area, because there were so many numerous tribes and they were all at war with each other. He was able to get treaties with them all, join together, and and fight this war with the colonists, which almost ended our colonies as we know it today.
Right. It's just so much, man. And I was talking with Bill and Len, who did all the camera work that we're about to show you. Like if you walk up and down Enfield Street, if you could just close your eyes and go back 200 years, there's people, Thomas Abbey walking with his drum, people coming out of their homes to fight for the revolution on Enfield Street, and
well, and plus, speaking of the revolution, we were the men that fought in the revolution from Enfield actually fought alongside George Washington in the defense of New York. And that was one part of this tour that was really the most fascinating to me, were the amount of, we always come to call in Enfield to fight any war that came, even when it was British, when we were British. And that's one of the things I really makes me sad to see there's no monuments for the Revolutionary War in this town. There's no monument to the French and Indian War in this town, and that's something to do. And I'll call people up today to give me a call, and maybe we can do something someday. And some other towns do.
We have this on film now.
Oh yeah, so I'm dedicated to this because we lost a lot of Enfield citizens throughout the.
People just
they have no idea that the surrender of Burgoyne, which was a huge historical moment in British history, we had Enfield men there that day, standing next to Burgoyne.
Isn't that something?
Very, very incredible.
Now we're going to cut to our first video. We did a segment at the Old Town Hall where we did some videos and showed some things. And we spoke with Bill Friday at the Old Town Hall a lot. So let's go to the first one. It's called Early Enfield History with Bill Friday.
Cool.
The Old Town Hall, Enfield, Connecticut, 1775. With me, I told you before, Mr. Bill Friday, who is from the Enfield Historical Society. Bill here knows all the ins and outs, all the history. Bill, what was life like in 1775 when they built this building?
Let me just go back a little further. In 1736, William Pynchon came, founded Springfield, Massachusetts.
Right.
A few years later, the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony gave him another land grant to the south of Springfield. And that included 10 miles east from the Connecticut River and 6 miles south of Long Meadow. And he petitioned the people in the Bay Colony to come and settle. He was anxious to get settlers. In 1679, Robert and John Pease came from Salem. They stayed the winter. Next spring, they called their families, and there was 25 families that came in, the original settlers of Enfield. Like back then, it was very difficult in the beginning because they didn't know what crops were to be planted.
Right.
So, but the Connecticut River Valley provided very fertile land, and they soon learned what they were doing. But the trees were very important. They bared fruit. They provided logs for the houses and the wagons and the barns. They were all hand-hewn beams with a broadaxe. So
that's crazy. That's crazy.
That's heavy duty. As far as food goes, they had domestic meats. They had venison, fish, wild game. They had wild and domestic fall vegetables. They had like corn and pumpkin, squash, peas, beans. The town of Enfield is broken into 6 villages.
Correct.
You've got Hazardville, you've got Thompsonville, you've got Stiddico, you've got Jacobs, you've got Wallop, You got London. And then a few years later, Eastern District split off and became Summers.
Right.
So, in a few of the historical houses here, Ephraim Pease House is now resided by a local resident. The John Meacham House later became the Martha Parsons Homestead. And then Dr. Simeon Field's house later became the Abbey Hotel. So Colonel Hazard had his mansion, which burned down, unfortunately, because it would have been a treasure for the town.
Oh my goodness.
And then there was Orrin Thompson had his house on the top of where the Threshing Sisters is.
I mean, there's just so much here. That was so exciting when I went with you, Bill, and I've gone to the old town hall a lot over the years, and every single time I go, I learn something new. I mean, it's incredible how much history there. Now, we were talking on the video a little bit. The Pease House, or the 6 different villages.
Well, again, we go back in 1680s or whatever when they first. There was 25 families that come. They followed the Pease brothers.
The first year was the Pease brothers, correct?
Right,
and they came and they stayed in the Enfield Cemetery.
Yep.
Which wasn't the cemetery at the time.
Which wasn't the cemetery.
Right.
The following year they called. There are 25 families that came.
And then the following year, Elisha became, and the rest of them, and that's when they kind of really settled. And
an interesting fact where they tried to sell the pensions again, which they deserve a monument in Enfield also. There's absolutely no doubt about it. They're very influential in Enfield's history in the beginning. And at the time, they were trying to give out land grants in Springfield, and they couldn't give them away. They could only give 3 land grants out of the original ones were taken from Springfield.
Really?
So they actually had to look out into Massachusetts further to find people that wanted to come here. Well, it's because this was still considered wild. End of in Springfield and Agawam. This was wild area still at the time.
It's like I've always wondered when that first family came, and again the winter after, why did they stop there? I mean, why didn't they continue south, or why did they stop here?
Right, it was because they bought a land grant to come here, and they even the Peases they came to check it out for a winter first. Right. They wanted to make sure they were making the right decision, which was to me is because that's where it was difficult because of the river. We had rapids, so you had the Hartford city that was running there in the Springfield, and it was I say the tale of 2 men, which was the Pynchon family and the Masons in Hartford, and the way they handled Native Americans at the time too, which we were very the Enfield side or the Pynchons were negotiated with them, learned the language, worked with them. Native Americans, and it was the opposite in Hartford. They were actually John Mason was credited for slaughtering 500 Indians at the shoreline.
I didn't know
that. So there was 2 very different cultures running between the rapids of Enfield that kind of kept people from connecting. And so that's why this area stood for the longest time until the late 1600s, abandoned basically. And then when John Pynchon came down and put a grist mill or a wood mill in, it gets burned down. Yeah. so nobody wanted to. We're very reluctant to come here. So the Pease brothers were extremely brave to come down here and start what they started.
Yeah, because it was dangerous.
Very dangerous.
It wasn't like you just came and settled. I mean,
no.
Your life was threatened. And excuse me. Then over time, they built the 6 villages. And when did that come to be about?
Well, actually, what they did was they had divisions: 1st Division, 2nd Division, 3rd Division. Well, the 3rd Division. This is down on what they call at the end of Enfield Street by the Trinity Farms. Mm-hmm. Okay, they moved out towards the eastern districts, out to Skiddaco and Summers.
Right.
So, and then there was there was every time you needed to get a district to get a school. So that what drove the people to Jacobs, and there was London and the different communities. And as soon as they got recognized, they could get a school. But one of the interesting points was about William Pynchon, he bought the land from the chief of the Podunks for $75 or 75 pounds sterling. So that's
that would be about what, $30?
And they still debate if that Indian tribe really had the rights to sell that property.
That's
so
right.
it's still debated
You're
today.
thinking like you're buying the Brooklyn, you're selling the Brooklyn Bridge. Because the Pacoda was the Western Mass Indians that really kind of settled on Skiddaco or whatever.
Right.
And then, okay, so they went from that first little, where the cemetery is now, there's a hill out there, you can, we need to mark that too.
Yeah, we do.
It's just so many marks. But we do, because that was the original stuff. And then where did they go from there? That was like the first meeting house was over there, correct?
Right.
Well, the first meeting house would be right where the Montessori school is today, right next to it.
No, that's the second one. That's the second one. There was one by the cemetery
correct,
from 1683 to 1708.
Right.
And I was telling you that it took them 17 years to get a minister, so the parishioners were doing their running the services.
And that's when they outgrew it. Yeah. And then they went to the second one.
Then they went to where the Montessori is. And that was in, after 1708. And they stayed there till 1775. But that's the church that Jonathan Edwards came down and gave his
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a
service.
bit, because people don't even realize that and how powerful and important at that time what Jonathan, that's world famous.
Yeah. There was a lot going on in the church at the time. There was the new lights, the old lights, and the churches were coming undone or whatever. And because the Puritans wanted to stay strict and.
Exactly. and that's this was when the Pisas first came to Enfield too. It was just the beginning, probably 10 or 15 years before the Salem witch trials, and they came from Salem at the same time.
Right, they came from Salem.
A lot of the political people were already in office at the time that had to do with the witch trials, which will come back, which really comes back to Jonathan Edwards because of the way the colonial life was. Yeah. Better fences, better neighbors. There was a reason why there was better fences, better neighbors, and that was because if your fence broke down and trampled your neighbor's garden, you would most likely starve during the winter. So these things were illegal, and it was very, like I say, very Puritan attitude of justice.
And we're gonna talk about that in a bit too, because we're going to do a little segment now on the Old Town Hall and how it came to be. There's a new video of that, and let's go to that. Let's check that out, see what you think. Just neat. When I first saw the placard outside that had the Kibbe name on it, and I did some research and found out that if you put a whole bunch of G's in front of grandfather, he built this place. Tell us about this building and the history of it.
Yeah. Soon after they settled Enfield in 1683, the Pease brothers decided they need a church building, and they built that next to where the cemetery is now.
Okay.
The present cemetery on Enfield Street. And that was in occupation to 1708. In 1708, they had outgrown they needed a bigger church, so they moved to, the second congregational church got moved to where the Montessori is now, across from Post Office Road.
Yep.
Okay. And in 1741, Jonathan Edwards came down and gave his famous speech at the second congregation.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that because of the importance of that speech here in town. But.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and so that was in existence to 1775. In 1775, they moved up to now what we call the Congregational Church
across the street
from South Road.
Yep.
And interesting point about that, I was saying that that was finished in January 1775. Well, in May 1775, Thomas Abbey was a private in the army, came around the meeting house, beating the drum, calling for men to volunteer, and it turned out that Colonel Nathaniel Terry and 75 men from Enfield went to Boston to participate in the War of Independence. So that church stayed until 1849. In let's see, we got that, 1849. In 1849, they were going to build a bigger congregational church. So this building was across the street. They decided to move this building to this side of the street.
Crazy.
And it was a meeting house at first.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then it took on all kinds of iterations, became the old town hall, and then it was used for a variety of functions.
It's amazing, like, how they could have gotten that building from over there to over here. I mean, it's just, I would like to have seen that, because that must have been something else.
No.
And they did it.
If you go upstairs, you'll see the pews, but there's a fake flooring now.
Right.
Where it used to look down
right
on
up here, where we'll show some after, there was no ceiling.
Right.
It was
right,
just
yeah,
open all the way to the
down
top.
there.
Yep.
And the building wasn't heated or anything like that. And
Right.
They would bring their little pots of coal or whatever to keep their feet warm, because those sermons were pretty long.
Oh,
Huh?
yeah. Everybody felt guilty about everything back then.
So again, an interesting point about the present Congregational Church, and Colonel Augustus Hazard donated the chandeliers that are hanging.
And they're still over there.
They're still over there.
That's amazing.
And the tall pillars at the altar were donated. I believe they came from Italy.
Right.
So he was Philip Thrank, donated to many church functions around there.
It's so fascinating how much history there is. Like, I keep saying that right in this town, but there is. And when you're walking or driving up and down Enfield Street one day, think about 250-ish years ago, there was a man named Thomas Abbey really marching with a drum up and down Enfield Street, and people coming out of their homes to fight for what they wanted, the freedom and everything, to be Americans and to get out of England.
Little part of that too is Enfield is one of the most patriotic towns in Connecticut.
And it still is.
And you can see that by the parades,
Yep. Yep,
the
it
Memorial
still
Day
is.
parade and
Yep.
4th of July parade. The people come out in droves to. So, in all the other wars,
Yes,
the
sir.
World War I, World War II, tremendous war effort by the residents of the men in Thompsonville, Enfield.
Okay, I mean, this stuff is so cool to me, because one of the things we talked about on that thing is the Old Town Hall got a very personal history for me, but it's for another day. But what the neatest thing about it for me was when it was across the street where the Congregational Church is now, how they moved it. Like, what did they do? I wish I could have been there to witness that. Could you imagine that big building moving across the street? And how did they do it? I mean,
in a time where they had very little technology.
I try to relate to the pyramids where they had the oxen and the logs that they would put under it or whatever and roll it along the logs. You get a team of oxen there.
I just wish there was some documentation on that.
Yeah.
Like how they obviously there's no photographs, but if there's some documentation on how they did it. And we're going to go into the second show a little bit. We're talking about the Old Town Hall itself, how it has a ceiling now, but it didn't once. Explain that again a little bit.
Yeah, that was there's the gallery on the second floor that looked down on the altar and whatever. And so when they moved it, they put a fake floor in. So now you go up there and you see this gallery and it served no purpose really if you look at it, but it was very important then. And
yeah, because if you go up there now, you see the pew. You know, it looks like a pew, and it looks like a pew on the at the front row. But and we'll show that a little bit later. But you go down. At that time, that floor wasn't there, so that pew is looking down onto the first floor when there's a preacher speaking and stuff like that. And you know, the Old Town Hall was used for obviously church, but what else did they do in that building? I mean, it was a meeting hall. It was
it's a town meeting,
meeting,
selectmen meetings
sure.
at the time. It was, and which was another little known historical thing was the selectmen, the board of selectmen that they originated in small towns. Still today, we have the same form of government in this area. We no longer have selectmen form since the 60s. It stopped the late 60s. But still today, from the 1600s today, that same exact form of town government is being practiced today, which
This is so neat to me.
and a lot of those minutes are in our clerk's office. We have historical records there also that have all those minutes that you're welcome to come and see, along with the Historical Society, what they have, and actually read the minutes of the meetings from the late 1600s.
And when I mean, we're going to say this a few times, but when is the Old Town Hall actually open for guests? When can people come in and look around?
Okay, well, what we see, the Old Town Hall and the Martha Parsons Homestead are both open 2 to 4:30 Sundays from the third Sunday in May all the way through to the last Sunday in October.
And there's no charge.
No charge.
But they do ask if you can for a donation,
Correct.
just to keep the thing going, and because you know the building still needs maintenance. Where do you guys get your money from for maintenance? And
We get a stipend from the town.
Okay.
So and then we have membership dues, and we have donations. We have the little store that's.
And that little store is neat because you've got some stuff in there. And one of the things I liked was that there's a copy. You know, it's a rectangle map, like
Sure,
this.
absolutely, yeah.
And it's one of the original maps of Enfield, and all the lines going from Enfield Street right down to the Connecticut River with a bunch of lines, and the people who owned each one of those lines. I think that's 1640 or something. I mean,
yeah, late 1600s also, and that was the original map of Enfield Street, which stretched from the stream down by High Street up as far as what is now South Road and a little further, I believe, which was the first land grant. That's where the strips of land that the Springfield sold off on land grants to the original settlers.
And,
so that's our true Main Street.
And that's where I know people go down metal detecting and stuff all throughout there. And there's one gentleman, I wish I could remember his name, but he comes on Facebook quite a bit, and he shows some of the things he's found, like especially on Kings Island. But even along, you've still got Indian heads. We're going to show some photos of this stuff in a bit. We still have Indian heads and all these, arrows and just anything that was, made from way back then. We're about done with the first show. We're going to wrap it up, and I'm telling you, this could be like a 4-part show, but we're doing it into a 2-part show, kind of squeezing it in. But Tom's going to go a little bit more on the second half about the bus tour that's coming again.
Yes.
We're going to do that. And so stay tuned, guys. This is exciting, and I hope you enjoyed the first episode. We'll see you next time.